The next-gen car hit a huge milestone this week. NASCAR tested multiple cars in a pack at Daytona these past 2 days. Let's look at some footage and see what we can learn. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. Groove? I don't know why I said that like a question. This has been a huge week for NASCAR. This is the first week we have seen more than 2 next-gen cars on track at the same time. We jumped that number up to 7, I believe? 7 next-gen cars built by actual NASCAR Cup Series race teams in a pack on the high banks at Daytona. We're gonna look at some clips and talk about what we see in those clips and listen to what some of the drivers and NASCAR executives had to say about this test. But first, we have to thank today's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by WorkPro Tools, the official tool provider of DGM Racing, and they've made a huge splash in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this past week. They are on both the 92 and the 36 cars this past weekend and finished 15th and 10th. They've loaded me up with tons of awesome tools, including this 87-piece set that's super portable, very convenient and easy to unfold. Quick and easy access to all of these important tools. They are huge racing fans as well. You'll see their paint scheme on track at Richmond this weekend, as well as 4 more times in October. They'll be representing Breast Cancer Awareness Month with a really cool pink paint scheme. I can't wait for y'all to see it. But this weekend they are hosting an awesome giveaway for fans of Out of the Groove. You can win your own 87-piece WorkPro tool set. By clicking that top link down in the description below, you'll see how easy it is to enter for a chance to win. But remember, this contest only lasts through this weekend. You have until Sunday, September 12th to enter. So be quick and be sure to keep an eye out for those awesome WorkPro tool paint schemes on track in the coming weeks. Thanks again to WorkPro Tools for sponsoring this episode of Out of the Groove. Now let's talk next gen. Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, several NASCAR Cup Series teams brought their own next gen cars down to Daytona Beach to test at Daytona International Speedway. This test was closed to the public, but NASCAR themselves have put out a ton of photos and clips from the test. We'll do our best to analyze what we can from these clips in just a few moments, but the first thing you're probably noticing is that some of the cars are showing off that all-new forward-leaning number placement. Notably the 42 of Ross Chastain, which is interesting because this is a Chip Ganassi Racing prepared next-gen car. We now know that Chip Ganassi Racing will not race next year, so that car will fall into the hands of Trackhouse at year's end. So kind of interesting that Chastain and Chip Ganassi Racing were there at all, but you can see that next-gen paint scheme with the 42 slid way forward. This looks better than that Kurt Busch Monster Energy show car we saw a couple weeks ago, but I don't know if I love it. I do love a lot of the design around the number and around the logos. It's built for this forward slid number, but my only real gripe with it is that the 42 I think is slid just a tiny bit too far forward. Slide it back towards the center like an inch, and I think we're in business. This looks pretty sharp. Another paint scheme we caught glimpses of that got everyone talking was Austin Dillon's number 3 Bass Pro Shops car. Yes, we're starting this video by talking about the paint schemes. I know, we're just getting it out of the way first. Ripping it off like a Band-Aid. This one, there's less to it than the Ross Chastain car, but I think this one is, I like this one more. This one is easier on the eyes in my opinion, mainly because the number 3 is not pushed quite as far forward. It's still inside the A-post, if you will. The 42 car was pushing it. You can see that the 4 is kind of on the fender. I worry that it's getting a little warped. Remember my rules. That's one of my rules. Don't break that rule. Meanwhile, the 3, you can tell that number is not being warped at all. I think that, to me, that number placement looks pretty good. If that's how all the cars look, I think I can get behind this change wholeheartedly. The 42 is pushing the envelope there. I just want to get that out of the way. A couple of the other cars in the test, like the 24 of William Byron, the 47 of Ricky Stenhouse Jr., did not debut forward slid numbers. Their paint schemes look very similar to the paint schemes they've been running on track this season. They didn't change anything. Understandable, it's just a test. Then of course there's Denny Hamlin who went with no number on the door. Oh, completely radical. Anyway, it's just a test, but you know, we are expecting to see forward slid numbers next season on all of the Cup Series next gen cars. So this was our first real glimpse of multiple new door numbers on new cars for the first time. So I wanted to mention it first. Again, rip it off like a Band-Aid. Now let's actually talk about what we saw as far as the racing is concerned. One of the first things you probably noticed, assuming you're watching this video with the volume turned up, the engines sound different. The exhaust, whatever it is, it's deeper. That shouldn't be a surprise. It's basically what we've heard since the next gen first was on track testing. The engine tone has always been kind of a deeper. I consider it like a snarl, like a rah. I don't know what that sound that I just made was, but you know what I mean? A deeper, throatier sound. Some of the single car runs we've seen in the past, I haven't been quite so sure how I feel about the sound, but hearing them rocket by in a pack, yeah, it's only 7 or 8 cars there, but that sounded pretty good, at least to me. Everyone will have a slightly different opinion, but I like the way these cars sound in a pack. I want to talk about a couple details people pointed out. Richard Childress Racing's official Twitter account put out a few photos, including this photo of the next gen car under the hood, and you'll notice that they actually wrapped the hood vent openings to better blend with the rest of the paint scheme on the hood, the logo on the hood. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I assume many teams will do similar things so that those hood vents that are kind of intrusive, they're taking up a lot of space on the center of the hood, the most expensive, the most valuable real estate on the car. I would assume many teams will wrap the hood openings the way RCR did for this test so that it doesn't disrupt the look of the main sponsor logo. But I thought that was an interesting kind of behind the scenes peek that I may not have noticed otherwise. I also saw a few people taking notice of the rear view camera for the first time. That's right, the next gen cars, at least to my knowledge, don't have a traditional rear view mirror in the cockpit. Instead, it's an actual rear view camera, like a backup camera you may have on your street car. Chris Buescher talked about it a little bit. Inside, we're working on getting some stuff figured out to make it a little more comfortable. The rear view camera is something that is really neat there. Learned a lot about it in the runs and the drafting runs there. You can actually see quite a bit more than you're used to. Objects in mirror are closer than they appear, and it still applies to that camera too. Chris Buescher, of course, one of the drivers in that test, so yes, there is a rear view camera instead of a traditional rear view mirror. This has been talked about for a number of months. I remember hearing about it during a much earlier test, but it hadn't really been talked about in a while. I saw a lot of people taking notice of it for the first time. But yeah, interesting little added bit of technology. I don't actually know why they're switching to a rear view camera. Is there something about the car that makes it hard to look out the back window traditionally? I have no idea, but anyway, rear view camera is there, and Chris Buescher seems to like it. We'll react to what NASCAR executives said in just a moment, but first I just want to look at a few of these clips. It's Daytona, and it is a test after all. I don't think these drivers are pushing their cars to the absolute limit. They're not making daring moves because they obviously don't want to wreck the field during a very important test where there's only a few next-gen cars even in existence at this point. That would be worst-case scenario. So take all of this footage with a grain of salt, but there were a few clips that NASCAR posted that really stood out to me at least a little bit. For one, I thought this was interesting. You can see William Byron duck to the outside kind of on his own, at least at first, and side draft Chris Buescher, and actually, just like we see in the cars today, normal super speedway racing, kind of pull Chris Buescher back a little bit. And again, at least at first, there wasn't anybody in the outside lane to push him. He kind of went out there by himself, got to his rear quarter panel, and pulled him back just like you'd see in a normal super speedway race today. So I know they tested a few different size spoilers, a few different rules packages this week, but the element of side drafting seems to still exist. If you look at a lot of these clips, one of the things I noticed is that the cars seem to be more spaced out than they were, say, a couple weeks ago during the Coke Zero Sugar 400, the cup race from a couple weeks ago, where guys were right on top of each other almost all night long, very little distance between bumpers, bump drafting very prevalent. Again, this is where I reiterate, this is a test, so they're probably not pushing the cars to the absolute limit. So maybe this is a false observation I'm making, but it looks like there's more space between the cars in this test than there was a couple weeks ago. Which, I don't know, maybe that means there's a bit more of an air bubble effect, but it's too early to read too much into that. I just figured I'd mention it at least. You can see in this clip, I mean, yeah, it's only a few cars in each line, but the inside and the outside lanes seem pretty equal, kind of just going back and forth, ebbing and flowing a little bit. The lead car seems to be able to change lanes a little bit and defend, maybe a little easier than we've seen in recent super speedway races with the huge runs that have been generated. Again, I keep putting an asterisk here. It's just a test. They're probably not testing the cars to the absolute limit here, but just figured I'd point that out as well. I wanted to show you guys some of these clips just because, you know, they exist. This is the first time we've seen a pack of next-gen cars, so it's somewhat interesting. But man, we've been duped by tests before. I remember the off-season just before the 2019 season when we saw NASCAR testing the 550 horsepower high downforce package at Las Vegas in the winter. It looked like a super speedway race. There was tons of drafting, tons of slingshots and passing happening up front, middle of the pack. It looked crazy. 4 wide, 10, 15 laps into a run, all this crazy stuff that we've never really seen since the 550 horsepower package actually debuted. At least not, after 2 laps from a restart. So that test, I think, set some false expectations for what that package was actually going to race like in practice. So I'm not going to make the same mistake here reacting to these Daytona next gen tests. Who really knows? But there you have it. You've seen a lot of the footage that NASCAR has put out in the last 48 hours. Form your own conclusions, or honestly don't. I think it's probably safest not to form any firm conclusions from these images. Now, I saw Bob Hockers from Fox Sports tweet out a few paragraphs from John Probst, NASCAR's VP of Racing Innovation, things he said after the 2-day test was complete, and I want to go paragraph by paragraph pretty much and discuss the things he discusses. Our main goals coming down to Daytona were to develop a tire with Goodyear that we could come back with in February, and also to make sure the speeds that the cars were going to run in single car and multi-car runs were within our targets. We made some runs yesterday. We were really close to the speeds we were looking for, but we only had 8 cars in the draft. We wanted to make sure that we're conservative coming back here and need to have something in our back pocket should we get here and speeds are too high. Overnight, we changed the tapered spacer and made it smaller to about 510 horsepower and reduced the rear spoiler to 7 inches. That had the desired effect today. We did slow the cars down some. The feedback from the drivers was that it wasn't a radical change from one to the next, so we feel like we now have that data to evaluate coming back here. Again, that's from John Probst, VP of Racing Innovation at NASCAR. Sounds like they're battling a similar issue that they've been battling with the current superspeedway package over the last year. How can NASCAR slow the pack down to speeds they are okay with? You remember earlier this year at Daytona and Talladega, Cup cars were going over 200 miles an hour in a pack pretty consistently. At Daytona, just a couple weeks ago, after NASCAR made some adjustments to the rules package, the pack was topping out around 192 miles an hour, I believe, give or take. So they decreased the speeds by 8, 9, almost 10 miles per hour mid-season with some subtle changes that, in my opinion, didn't really affect the overall quality of the racing. The next gen car, it sounds like they took some wild swings over the last couple of days. For what it's worth, Joshua Mendoza posted a couple days ago, this was during the first day of testing, he calculated that the cars were going about 192.483 miles per hour in a pack, which it would be pretty similar to speeds we saw a couple of weeks ago. But again, that's only with 7, 8 cars, and that was early in the 2-day test, so it sounds like they experimented a little bit, maybe lowered the speeds a tiny bit more. No idea. Either way, if the cars are going 188, 189, 190 or faster at super speedways, as long as the racing is competitive, as long as guys can get enough of a run to pass each other, especially up front, I'm fine. I mean, I don't want to see the cars going 160 around Daytona, but I don't need to see 205 in a pack. Like, I just don't. I understand that that's pushing the envelope, tempting fate a little too closely. So I get it. We'll see what NASCAR comes to. It sounds like they were fairly pleased by the end of the test with what the speeds look like. But, and we'll talk about this again in a moment, it sounds like they will come back here in January, right before the season, with a lot more cars to test an even bigger pack. So we'll see what happens there. Anyway, going back to that John Probst quote, let's hear more of what he had to say. We obviously have a list of things to work on coming out of here. We have to work on the heat in the car. We have some ideas there. We used the afternoon today to try some big swings at things and found some directions to go, so I feel like we made some really big gains there. This is probably the most concerning issue that emerged this week, that the interior of the cars, the cockpit basically where the driver sits, the temperatures are too high. It is too hot. We've compared the inside of Cup Series cars to like ovens in the past, and sometimes that's been a bit hyperbolic, but some of the temperatures I've heard rumored that we're hitting in the cockpit with these next-gen cars, it's no longer hyperbole. It's actually like an oven in there, and that may not be safe, especially in the summer months next season. Again, it sounds like they tried some things and maybe saw some improvement, but there was this quote from Chris Buescher again. He said, "It's pretty warm, so we're working on trying to cool it off. We've got some different hose configurations, so we're going through those, trying to alleviate some of the heat inside. But aside from that, once you get strapped in, it doesn't feel a whole lot different than any other race car." So Buescher acknowledging there that it got a little hot inside. I saw this interesting tweet from Bozy on Twitter. We've referenced his tweets before in regards to the next gen car, but one Twitter user pointed out there seemed to be like an opening, like a vent or a gap in the windshield of Austin Dillon's car. And Bozy tweeted, they're experimenting with a variety of ducts for the windshields to try to cool down the interior of the next gen car. An actual opening in the top of the windshield. Now, I'm no engineer, but I do believe, air flying through there, car going 190, 200 miles an hour, that air should cool the interior down, at least some. I don't know to what extent. But I do wonder a little about the safety of having an opening in the windshield. I mean, it's not right in front of the driver's head, it's off to the side a little bit, but still anything like that, I don't know. I don't know what that could do to the structural integrity of the windshields themselves. So maybe some questions there. I guess that's one of the things NASCAR was trying. That's something that's obviously different from the current Gen 6 cars. We don't have openings in the front windshield like that. Of all the things we saw this week, I think the only thing that really concerned me were these reports that the interior of the car was just too hot to send drivers out in for 4 hours. That's a serious concern. They might be able to get away with it in February, March, April, when temperatures across the country are pretty cool, but come May, June, July, they're probably gonna have to figure something out. They're gonna have to tweak on the car, adjust on the car in its first couple of months to make sure those temperatures are not dangerously high come the summer. Anyway, back to that John Probst quote. He wraps up by saying something I mentioned a moment ago. We'll probably come back here in January and do another test with more teams. It's an important track for us to get right. We'll probably have a good number of teams, possibly 26 or more. 26, that is a lot of race cars. So hey, preseason Thunder is back. Yeah, it's been a while. 6 or 7 years, I think, since the last time we had those January Daytona tests that seemed to go on forever, kind of needlessly, but it was always fun to come home from school and flip on Speed Channel and watch some super speedway testing just for the heck of it. So we might be getting some of that again this year. Anyway, Austin Dillon tweeted this, kind of a recap of the week. Solid next gen test. We made a package change for day 2 and it was good for the draft, taking the spoiler down a little bit and came off the horsepower. Handling wise, still learning. The steering is a little quick. We didn't wreck any of these cars, which is good. We learned a lot. Another comment there about the steering. We've heard multiple drivers comment about the maybe finickiness of the steering, especially at bigger oval tracks in recent months, so maybe worth noting there. But all in all, good news. Nobody wrecked cars, at least passed the eye test. Again, those clips I've been showing you guys, that looks like Daytona. I mean, that looks good. Sounds okay. Everyone will have a maybe slightly different opinion there. I think the sound of the engines is pretty cool. Really, the only big concern I have is the heat inside the cars. Hopefully these things are actually drivable in the summer months. That's gonna need to be worked on for sure. What do you think of the next gen car based on these images, based on these comments that we've talked about here today? How do you feel? Is your confidence increased, decreased, about the same? Let me know down in the comments below. The next gen is still set to debut in this year's Daytona 500. Maybe the Busch Clash, if they run it on the road course still, I guess it might debut there, but it sounds like the beginning of this coming season schedule is still up in the air. We might find that out very soon. If you've missed all the rumors, we've done a couple of videos this week about them already. Go check those out. But anyway, next gen, yes, right around the corner. Very exciting stuff. Thank you all for watching. That's all I've got. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR news, rumors, reactions, predictions, and much more day in, day out. And as always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. I couldn't do the show without your tremendous support every single month. Got a cool video I shot at Darlington coming out very soon. I know I've been delayed because there's been just so much to talk about this week, but you'll see my Darlington vlogs very shortly. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.